My deep appreciation of theater history was instilled in me by Tom Empey, a college mentor to me and hundreds, if not thousands of others. While teaching Greek theater terms, he would grab the fabric of his slacks and say,
"You see these pants? Euripides, Eumenides,"
making light of content that could be considered rather dry and stuffy while still maintaining respect for the art, which is what I want to do with this podcast. For each episode, I invite a guest from the many paths my theater career has taken me down. I give my guests no idea what we'll be talking about, but they know we're going to find an outrageous story about theater history and perhaps get a better understanding about why we're still doing it after all these years. So, welcome to Euripides Eumenides, and I am your host, Aaron Odom.
Apocalypse, I said, why you want to show up now? Just when the heart of my life was getting good. I'll give you one more chance. Walk on out of the door, yeah. Get your ass to getting where the getting is good.
Good morrow, Eumenidites. This is Aaron Odom from Trident Theater, bringing back your favorite theater podcast and mine, Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. First of all, I want to thank all of my listeners who found the show during my little hiatus for the first half of 2025. For those of you who may not know, I had to take a break from doing this show as I got the opportunity to direct a dream project that I had been thinking about for almost 20 years, a stage adaptation of Stephen King's Misery. I even did an episode about the play sometime last year, and I loved how my guests and I analyzed that show and why we love horror stories. And this episode is all about horror stories. But I'll get back to that in a minute. But this hiatus I just took gave me the opportunity also to reevaluate this podcast and how I'd like to deliver it into the future. So I'm going to try something of a seasonal format where you'll get about 15 to 20 episodes per season, and then I'll take a break to recharge my creative batteries. Misery did require a lot of my creative energy, so after it was done, a break from my creative pursuits was really needed. Plus, I don't think I would have given you the best stuff that I have to offer, frankly. So I think I'll be able to deliver the same level of content as I have over the past 4.5 years. Wow, that's crazy to think about. But this might even give me a little bit more regularity and consistency. Another thing is I've also considered how to get you extra content as well, not to mention a through line of communication directly to me. So for now, following the show on Instagram is best, and you can always drop me a line at trident@tridenttheater.com. That's my email. But I'm looking into creating a paid content place where you can get new and exclusive content about the current world of theater and maybe even some fresh and entertaining takes on works that are in the public domain. I'm also looking at setting up a Discord, but again, for now, make sure you follow the show on Instagram. That's Euripides_Eumenides. Look at the title of the show in your podcast app on how to spell that, but that's where you get all the current updates about the podcast. Or you can follow the Instagram feed for Trident Theater as well and follow the link in the bio to Euripides Eumenides. All right, let's dive into some theater history again, huh? For this episode, I brought back playwright Jack Canfora. We discussed at the beginning of the episode that Jack is kind of living the life of the working playwright right now and getting new works published and hoping his previous works find new audiences, etc. Hey, theaters, if you're looking for a good work to stage, please consider Jack's play Jericho. It's really damn good, and you can even watch a full production of it staged by his totally online streaming theater company, New Normal Rep. And right now, that can be found on YouTube. Just look up New Normal Rep. I'll make sure a link to that is in the show notes as well. But remember, the play is Jericho, the playwright is Jack Canfora, and you can find all things in the Canfora-verse at jackcanforawriter.com. That's Jack, spelled just like Jack, Canfora, Canfora, writer, as in somebody who writes things, WRITER.com, jackcanforawriter.com. Jack has won lots of awards and worked with lots of amazing people, which is why I asked him to come back for this episode. Now, having just recently directed a horror play on stage myself, the concept of horror theater, it's just always been something that's really interesting to me. So for this one, I dove deep. And by the end of this conversation, Jack and I, for lack of a better term, had to admire the grit and determination that it takes to create a theatrical atmosphere in which an emotion can be felt and analyzed as closely as in horror theater. So, without further ado, and I know there's going to be those of you who might think I'm mispronouncing this thing, but you can go ahead and blame my Apple Translate app and Google Translate. That's your call. But without further ado, here's episode 1 of season 2, The Grand Guignol. But anyway, Jack, we were just catching up. It sounds like you're still living the life of the writer. You've got several works in progress, which is great. Trying to find a place to stage, but you have a cool new project coming up. Tell me about this podcast.
Well, my friend Michael Sato and I have written and recorded. It's not released yet to the public, but hopefully in the not too distant future, we find the right platform. It's a take on the true crime podcast world, which is very popular, and it's sort of like a Spinal Tap version, I would argue, of crime. And it's called The Murderer Killings. I'm sort of acknowledging here that it's obviously a bit of a satire, but when there's no acknowledgement at anywhere in the show that it's anything but real,
right?
And I have put out on TikTok a couple of brief videos. We'll probably be putting out more of me promoting the Murderer Killings and, saying facts about the city and the murder victims and stuff. And some people are very appalled that, we're being so flippant. I mean, they obviously don't know that I'm being facetious. Describe it as a horrifying, tragic, and hopefully commercially compelling triple murder. And they, these young, but they're like, well, it's terrible of you trying to make money off of it.
Trying to make,
which,
the irony being that is legitimately what every
that's exactly what they do. Yeah.
True crime podcast is doing. It's like, well, let's make some money off of this grisly thing. Oh my God, that's funny. Yeah. That is so funny. I mean, it's been a thing for years, and we really latched onto it in the 80s with like serial killers. And, out of one corner of our mouth, we're going, oh, that's awful. That's terrible. And then the other corner of our mouth, we're going, I really want to know more.
Pretty compelling. Yeah. It's pretty compelling. And this sort of follows all the tropes of true crime podcasts. It's a small town that is seemingly very insular, but you find out that these dark secrets and everything is corrupt. And it's a town that is controlled by a ruthlessly powerful family. They're pudding magnates. They've discovered they great manufacturers of pudding, and it was invented, and they came out with a brand in 1915, and it was a runaway success. And even later, when they had to remove the cocaine from the recipe, it was still very popular. And so,
yeah.
And so there's a triple murder that takes place in the town of Shady Grove. Our well-meaning but frankly a little vaguely hapless podcast host takes us through the steps. So hopefully that'll be out before too long. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. So the Murderer Killings?
Yes, the Murderer Killings.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I can already see a follow-up, the death of the Murderer Killings. Yeah. So with that grisly topic in mind, I don't know how I've taken a break here for a little while, and it always surprises me when I get a guest back on. Now, you don't know anything about the topic we're going to be talking about today, but it's funny. We're jumping right from Murderer Killings into what we're going to be talking about today. So to start things off, Jack, I'll ask you this question. Okay. In your experience, what has been a surprising audience reaction to something that is seen or experienced on stage?
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. I mean, I think I've had a few experiences with that. When I was, I guess it's not necessarily unexpected, but when I was in my younger and more vulnerable days, as an actor, I was working in a Shakespeare company, and we were doing Macbeth, and we made a lot of our money basically with school trips. And there's a kid in the poor kid. He was like in the second row, but he was asleep the whole time, which some of the teachers were too. So I get that. But his legs were over the seat in the next row, and it just was driving me nuts the whole time. you can't really see into the audience, but I could see that far. And he's like tossing and turning. He's like deep in REM cycle, and like just the legs are slung over. And so I had a little monologue, and so I had a flat sword, a broadsword with me, and so I go and I take this. I go down the couple of steps to say the monologue, and I sort of whack him a little bit on the calf. I finish the monologue, which is I probably not strictly speaking kosher, but I was just I was so frustrated at that point.
Oh my God.
I think in general, I don't know why it's a surprise, but it always is. There are people who go to the theater clearly who inevitably don't seem to understand that we can hear what they're saying too. And they think it's like a really high def television show. I think they're thinking because they're used to, I think, talking to the characters and about the characters on TV as they're watching TV, and they don't realize that we're in the middle of playing. We can hear you. It's not supposed to be a dialogue between us, So that's happened a lot. And there have been plenty of moments like that. There also, I think probably a lot of people have this experience too, where every audience is different, and there are nights when you can sort of reliably depend on certain things going in a certain rhythm and certain things working, but some nights you'll get a laugh on something that you hadn't expected at all. Or what will get a chuckle will get a huge laugh, or what will get a huge laugh one night won't get a laugh at all the next night. Things like that. So audiences are always surprising you, and which is good in a way, because you're if you start to rely on some things that become rote, you're in trouble, I think, when you're doing theater. So you have to always you have to earn it every night, but also sometimes having to sort of just like you look at your fellow actors like, well, I got a reaction. I didn't expect that, and so we've had moments like that, to be sure.
Yeah.
So that comes close to answering the question, but yeah.
Well, I like what you said about, we have to earn it every night, because, in some cases there are things that you'll do on stage that might be, we'll call them shocking. And if an audience looks at it and goes, yeah, okay. Then, maybe you didn't earn it. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you didn't get there.
A lot of that reaction, to be sure.
Yeah, right. Okay, what time is it? Your kid watching the Scottish play, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think he must have taken a lot of NyQuil before this.
That must have been it
before it started. I mean, I think once the action started, we really put him into a deep sleep. But and in that same production, actually, this is actors will sometimes, and this is not really good behavior, but actors sometimes long into a run of a show will try to sort of throw the other actor off a little bit occasionally, which is not is not acceptable behavior, but I have done it. And I was thrown one time in that actual production of Macbeth. I actually was playing Macbeth, and no spoiler alerts, but he at one point he goes off stage to murder King Duncan. And so I gave the speech, and then I go off and I go off stage right, and I wait in this little alcove, and then I come back on later. And this night, as I go off into the little alcove, the actor who plays Duncan is like in pajamas, brushing his teeth, and is shocked that I'm come to murder him, and that sort of. And then I had to go on the stage like 2 seconds later, so I was. I had to keep a straight face. He had baby ducks in his pajamas, and he had his crown on, brushing his teeth.
So I'm going to start with just kind of a little more recent story here.
Okay.
In January 2019, after a 7-year absence from the West End stage, prolific actor Cate Blanchett appeared in a new production at the National Theatre. Blanchett played opposite Game of Thrones actor Stephen Delane. Remember, and sorry, spoilers, he played the wicked Stannis Baratheon, who burned his own. Oh, great actor. But for my listeners, he's the guy that burned his own daughter at the stake as an offering to the gods so he could win his battle the next day.
Yeah. Famously unlikable Stannis Baratheon.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And in the John Adams miniseries with Paul Giamatti, he plays Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, but
Tremendously good.
is just another one of those guys that you're like, oh, I've seen him before, and I really liked him. And
Right.
what's his name? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So the pair played the appropriately named woman and man in a play by playwright Martin Crimp titled "When We Have Sufficiently Tortured Each Other."
Well, write what you know, and it's really the parts they were born to play. So,
Right, as men and women are wont to
yeah.
do. Crimp designed the play as a series of modernized vignettes loosely based on the 17th century novel Pamela by Stephen Richardson, in which a man of wealth and high status uses his power to influence a serving girl to marry him despite her many rebuffs. So the modern adaptation is a bit different, however.
Mhm.
It's set in a mechanic's garage. The play's subtitle is 12 Variations on Samuel Richardson's Pamela, and is a more direct look at how, in 2019, gender roles were often blurring.
Hmm.
The play still deals with the many mechanisms involved with authority and gender roles, so much so that at one point the actors flip gender roles, and Blanchett plays the man and Delane plays the woman. It's not unusual territory for Blanchett, but reviewers did note how easy it was for Blanchett to slip from her higher tones of a woman in a fight or flight situation to go to a man with a solid and authoritative tenor to her voice. Right?
She, which I probably couldn't do, but she played Bob Dylan, right?
Bob Dylan. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Delane otherwise, quote, submits to her while sporting a blonde wig, black underwear, and a maid's costume.
Okay.
So that's how we make a man into a woman.
Right.
But the play goes quite a bit further. One scene culminates in two couples engaging in a foursome. It's ultimately horrifically sexually violent towards the women. And in the final scene, Blanchett is seen. Okay, and here's where I get my my explicit rating. Blanchett is seen lubricating a strap-on dildo that her character intends to use on her male counterpart just before the curtain closes.
Wow. So it's a musical, or
it's a family affair.
yeah. Sure. Wow, my goodness.
Now, maybe it's more that in 2025 we hear that about a play presented in 2019 and we go, yeah, that seems somewhat appropriate. Right before COVID is just like, let's push the envelope, let's push some buttons.
Yeah.
But as we've discussed on this program before, sexually explicit material has been no stranger to major theater works for literally centuries. Now, it could have also been that the National chose to stage this production on one of its smaller stages, making the subject matter quite a bit more intimate. That makes one of the earliest reactions to the play simultaneously anticipated, but also surprising. In the first night of previews, what is claimed to have been an older member of the audience fainted, completely due to the subject matter.
My goodness, fainted. I guess that's a nice thing for the writer to put in his resume, I would think.
Absolutely. Right? I knocked him dead.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't low blood sugar or anything. Just watched this incredibly explicit stuff and passed out.
Okay. Was it too shocking? Or maybe like, he's like, oh my God, they've been reading my dream journal,
I wanted to try that.
Yeah.
Now, before the first night of previews, no content disclaimers were in any of the marketing on the website. They were nowhere. Right. But after the first preview, emails began going out to the ticket holders for the second preview night, warning them of the sexually explicit content, specifically noting the sexual violence. Right. And from then on, there's content warnings that were displayed in the lobby and in any future marketing. Many criticized the production thereafter for not having any warnings for the first preview performance. It seemed like an attempt at grassroots marketing to not warn audiences of the prurient nature of the content, so that such a reaction as fainting could be a result, and thus result in some free underground marketing.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I do that on my stuff now. I think I'm starting to see it be really popular where a theater will put like a movie rating on their plays so that they can avoid having any kind of, somebody coming in and going, you didn't tell us they were going to use the F word. And
yeah, it's heavy stuff. I mean, I got lightheaded just from your description. Do
you need to lie down? I mean,
I think to be held. But so, okay, go on.
Yeah. So regardless, the word got out, and despite Kate Blanchett being a headliner who could have filled any of the larger houses at the National just based on her name alone, of course, tickets sold out like crazy and could often only be obtained by scalping or through the lottery. The rest of the run actually had somewhat lukewarm reviews, as by 2018 or by 2019, audiences were generally ready to see such difficult content. Many reviewers basically stated that the tropes actually seemed a little predictable. And here's one example from the Guardian.
Not an other Kate Blanchett and dildo play.
Oh, jeez.
I have to sit through one of those slogs again.
How many sexual assaults this week?
Oscar-winning actor and a sex toy. It's been done. Anyway.
Just beat that horse to death. Oh, God. Okay.
Okay.
So here's one example from The Guardian. The man, seeking to imprison his victim like Richardson's Lord B or offering material wealth in exchange for freedom, simply emerges as a neurotic weakling easily outwitted by the woman's resilience. When the roles are reversed, the woman assumes a brisk masculinity, while he, in female garb, seems curiously defenseless. However valid the point, it makes for an uneven contest. And it goes on. Mitchell's production is sexually explicit, but I can only assume that anyone shocked by the play's arguments about the overthrow of oppressive masculinity and the malleability of gender must have spent the last decade in monastic seclusion.
So not a rape. You don't put that on the marquee. Yeah.
No. The Guardian saw it.
Yeah.
But I can see that. Like, I haven't seen it. I haven't read the play,
Right.
but I can see how, you're trying to make a point about men are still overpowering women. And so when you say, let's flip this gender role, it does become like she's belching and scratching her butt. And the man playing the woman is now like Blondie from the Blondie comic strip and just dingy and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I get it, but I can see where the critics are coming from.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that it's obviously meant to be provocative.
Mm-hmm.
And my feeling about being provocative is that's great. That's wonderful if you can be provocative in the service of something.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the play. I haven't seen it, obviously, except now in my nightmares. But I don't know if they were doing the play and it wasn't working, and then they said, what we need more dildo, or if that was the intent all along and it was meant to be this shocking expose of gender roles, blah blah blah. I do think, I think you're going. It's a self-selecting group, theater audiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So. 99.9% probably of the audience, generally, if you ask them before they saw the play, do men in our culture still probably wield too much power physically or politically, and are men not always, things aren't equitable? I think everyone would have said yes, of course. So I'm not sure what the point of pointing that out would be, but again, who am I to tell, another writer what's interesting? And obviously, Stephen Delane and Kate Blanchett agreed to do it. It's not like they're hard up for work.
No, exactly. Yeah.
They really saw something worthy in the story, in the text. You try your best, and that's the thing. You don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Everyone is trying their best to make the play really good or make the movie really good, and sometimes it doesn't work out, but it's not for lack of trying.
Right.
And I can't imagine. I mean, the actors are just so good and so smart that there had to have been something in there that got lost in translation by the time it, from the page.
Yeah. And that could have just been the production of it. See, like I can understand like shoulder shrugging at the content, considering what had come before in the world of theater for literally centuries. I mean, despite efforts throughout history to censor theater, difficult content still pushes through somehow. The best example I can think of, many ancient Greek plays had explicit violence in them, but generally the violence happens off stage. The
Right.
audience would just see the result. I mean, we don't see Oedipus blind himself with Yocasta's brooch. We see him wander on stage with bloody streams coming from the eye holes in his mask.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't have to show the woman being sexually assaulted. The woman
Right.
can just give a convincing performance of just having that happen to her, and we get it. But yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But in my opinion, that's also because theater is a place in which the audience can experience some of the seedier sides of life in an environment where they are not meant to have specific personal ramifications from the action felt on stage.
Right. Well, I mean, in fairness, that is the entire point of theater, according to Aristotle, right? Is that you go through this catharsis and you experience these things vicariously. And I do think, especially post-COVID, and certainly in this world of ours in general, that there's a lot to be said for experiencing something with a group of people communally.
Yeah.
And so you can argue that yes, the play, or whatever its other merits or faults, isn't necessarily saying anything new, but the experience of being there in the same room with these people and with other people viscerally, there's, I think, maybe validity, you could argue, to having that experience and have the audience become just a little bit uncomfortable. And something is brought home. There's a difference between perhaps understanding something intellectually and really having it hit home viscerally. So that would be like, I just completely reversed my opinion from a minute ago. But I mean, that's the devil's advocate argument, I think.
Well, here's an example I can say. Like, if you go to see a production of Glass Menagerie, as an audience member, you're not meant to feel personal guilt for leaving your out-of-touch mother and disabled sister in a wretched tenement in St. Louis. But perhaps you'll empathetically feel that and examine your own actions. Like, have I been a good family member? Was my mother right in trying to push this kind of lifestyle on us? Stuff like that. Hopefully you're asking those questions and you're not going like, oh, well, I never would have done that. Maybe you would. I don't know.
Yeah.
But regarding content that makes people feel uncomfortable, there was actually a time in theater history in which people would seek out this seedier side of life in order to deliberately feel uncomfortable and see things that they really aren't, quote, meant to see. So, Jack, how much do you know about the term Grand Guignol?
Oh yeah, I first of all, it's my email password, but secondly, it's a style of theater, correct me if I'm wrong, in which basically like there's evisceration and it's just sort of reveling in the blood and guts of something. Like Titus Andronicus actually be an example of that, right? And it was this style of theater, I think, in France, right? Basically, where it started in France, in which you sort of wanted to see blood and guts on the stage, and that was sort of the thrill of it, right? Am I is that I'm in the ballpark?
You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what we're deep diving into today, the Grand Guignol in Paris.
All right.
So, the murderer killings. Classically, the term Grand Guignol has become synonymous with a particular sensationalist subgenre, as you were saying. Quote, in genre criticism, the term Grand Guignol is a favorite descriptor for horror or crime tales that emphasize grisly violence and scenery-chomping melodrama.
Right.
Born out of another swing of the pendulum at the end of the 19th century, Grand Guignol theater could be considered more or less a direct reaction to the romantic plays and melodramas that dominated most of the 19th century. And as you may recall, much of the romantic and or melodramatic movements relied heavily on the battle between good and evil, or rather vice and virtue, in which good would most often triumph over evil. This is when we had rewritings of Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, in which things turned out a lot nicer for their title characters.
Right. Yeah. Open an antique shop. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Boldor, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as you may recall, one of the movements that was a direct reaction and a violent swing of the pendulum in the other direction was naturalism. And I covered this in episode 4, The Era of Isms, but succinctly put, naturalism was the, quote, slice of life theater, in which theater artists strove to represent life as accurately as possible on stage, leaving out as much of the supernatural as possible. What could be observed was most important rather than anything that could not tangibly be proven, right? So, as you were suggesting, let's take a trip to Paris at the end of the 19th century.
Wonderful.
While most respected theater establishments saw the regular and expected draw of patrons, many other theaters relied on what could be considered air quotes, specialized entertainment to draw a crowd.
Yeah, yeah.
And one such theater was the Théâtre du Grand Guignol. My French is terrible. An intimate space that I'll describe a little bit later. But to get there was almost an appetizer of what could be seen on the stage later in the evening.
Mm-hmm. All right.
The Grand Guignol, which literally translates to English as big puppet, I'll leave you to determine what you think that means by the end of this,
Sure.
was located in the Pigalle district of Paris. And if you go to the Wikipedia page for Pigalle today, one of the first lines reads as follows. Pigalle is famous for being a tourist district with many sex shops, theaters, and adult shows on Place Pigalle and the main boulevards. So,
Okay.
so just show up. You're kind of, oh, okay, we're at a carnival. I know what I can expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apparently, it got its name Pig Alley after World War II. And in point of interest, this is where the Moulin Rouge is located.
Okay. Sure. That makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So here's a description of how to get to the theater. Quote, a patron would leave the metro at Place Pigalle and walk down the narrow streets past a brazen display of the sex industry into the tucked-away venue. There was a sense of a journey into forbidden territory, into the underbelly of Paris with its promise and danger of sex and violence. So as you're walking to the theater, it's just like, I looked it up. It's an absolute maze of alleyways until you get to the one Impasse Chaptal, the long and narrow alleyway at the end of which is the theater. An old church converted for theatrical entertainment. I love that already. An old church.
Yeah.
Right? But still keeping a lot of the Gothic architecture and Christian motifs, as though the patrons within were being consistently watched by heavenly powers.
Yeah. Well, that's terrifying to some, and I'm sure
I know.
An appetizing to other people. So this is okay. I'm in for this. So this is fascinating. Yeah.
So it's like, just to get there, it's this winding, twisting way to get there. And in every shadow, there's probably some sort of illicit activity going on, whether it be drugs or sex transactions or anything.
Right.
And you're seeing and hearing all of it and possibly participating. I don't know.
Right. Depends on how early you get there, I guess.
Yeah, right. And here's a cutting I found from an article about the theater that I would consider something of a marketing blurb to entice new patrons to enter. Quote, the theater of horror was famous for its effects and tricks, and yet what we find when we read the plays is far from a gore-fest splatter show, but rather remarkably crafted realist works, or slickly structured comedies that would demand theatrical brilliance and an extremely focused performance.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. That sounds that makes it sound very classy.
Right. So, I mean, it's like the end of Hannibal when you're feeding Ray Liotta his own brain. You've got to actually, believe you're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it hasn't gone away. It's still, it sells, right? Still, to a part of the populace. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, simply put, the Grand Guignol became famous for putting an audience in front of some of the horrors that man can concoct against other men in order to naturalistically explore some of the seedier sides of human nature. You're doing it yourself with your podcast. Murders happen, and we're fascinated by them. And that's like the biggest genre of podcast out there right now is everybody's got their own favorite murder, gory murder podcast.
Yeah.
So, while this was meant by founder Oscar Metenier to be a naturalistic theater, Metenier and his successors found that their stories were often best told by using rather melodramatic methods, often in performance. So the stories are naturalistic, but
putting a slice in the slice of life. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Metenier designed the Grand Guignol as more of a realistic theater, often taking stories directly out of newspapers and dramatizing them for stage purposes. So it's like, we're not making this up. This actually happened. We're just kind of showing you what we think might have happened. Mm-hmm. But it purposefully took stories of a more lurid nature to explore the human condition on stage. One of his first plays, Louis, translated to him, exclamation point, J'accuse. It's about a prostitute who realizes she's in a locked room with a psycho killer, as do the rest of the characters in the play, who begin the play by reading most of the killer's exploits in a newspaper. So it's a cool locked room thing, and the hero of it all is a prostitute.
Mon Dieu.
Ah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Heart of Gold.
It's believed that the success of this play inspired Metenier to continue to explore the grisly side of human nature through his theater, and thus the Grand Guignol was born in 1897.
Okay.
But Metenier soon relinquished direction of the theater to his friend Max Maury, who really began to make the name Grand Guignol synonymous with gory and gritty dramas with true-to-life special effects.
Okay.
In 1897. Okay? One of the actors in the company was also a particularly gifted stage technician and invented methods for practical live visual effects, like eyeballs being removed from heads,
Yikes.
heads and limbs being lopped off, and even acid melting faces off.
Wow.
Oh, man. You know, if you can see it and believe it, then
Yeah.
there it is. It happened,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
I mean, this is why we all thought David Blaine could float.
Right. Yeah. I believe he can do anything he sets his mind to. I mean, yeah. I mean, in a way, that's nothing new, right? You mentioned the Greeks, right? In King Lear, spoiler alert, a character has his eyes gouged out.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, in Titus Andronicus, everyone, I think that's always been one of the colors people use in theater. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you were talking about Scottish play earlier. You know, they toss his head around at the end.
They do. They do.
Oh, wait, sorry, spoilers.
Yeah.
One of the effects that they created was to evoke an image of a person being skinned alive on stage. Evidently, the technicians had long pieces of elastoplast, which is like a kind of tape where you can peel off the top layer and just expose the adhesive side. For this tape, the sticky adhesive side had been painted red.
Oh, that's clever.
And then the top layer was like a flesh tone kind of thing.
Flesh tone. Yeah.
So that when it was ripped off a person, not only would there be a sickening sound of adhesive being removed,
Yeah.
but also the tension of like the top layer is stuck to the skin. So it's actually taking you some effort to rip it off.
Yeah. That's kind of brilliant.
And the visual element of the bloody skin underneath.
Oh my gosh.
So you're seeing it all. And even if it's just really fast, you know, it's like
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah. No, that's going to be horrifying and awesome.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I am currently considering a number of new and practical uses for elastoplast. Hey gang, while we're stopped, I just want to remind you that if you want to keep up to date on all things Euripides Eumenides, then you'll need to follow the show on Instagram at Euripides_Eumenides, or you can follow the Trident Theater Instagram feed and follow the link in the bio to the Euripides Eumenides page. I also want to encourage you to go see what playwright Jack Canfora is up to and what he's done. Go check out his website, jackcanforawriter.com, and again, a YouTube link to watch his play Jericho, staged by his streaming company New Normal Rep, is in the show notes. And speaking of Jack, let's get back to him and the rest of the Grand Guignol. Oh, but slick stage tricks were not always required to evoke a reaction from the audience. Paula Maxa was an actor in the company throughout the 1920s and 30s and came to be known as, quote, the most murdered woman in the world due to the number of times she was seen to have been killed on stage.
Wow. That's a distinction you don't want, but yeah, that's great.
I don't know. I'd put that under my name on my resume at this point. I'm the most murdered woman in the world. That's what I do.
That's amazing. Good for Paula. Good for her.
Yeah, I mean, Gallagher doesn't go, no, I don't do that watermelon shit anymore.
Yeah, well,
he does a lot of stuff. Yeah,
that's true.
Our modern day scream queens probably don't realize that they have a lot to owe to Maxa, as she simply became known just by her last name, Maxa.
Nice.
Anyway, a lot of the actual theater practice of the Grand Guignol that we know came from journals of people in the company like Maxa, who had this to say, advocating somewhat for violence to remain offstage. Quote, imagination is always superior to reality, and it is imagination added to the trembling of a soul which constituted the poetry of fear. That's such a beautiful quote.
It really is. It's very good.
But
Yeah.
basically, she's saying that much like in ancient Greece, it's better not to see the violence in front of you, but rather the consequences of the violence.
Yeah, it's I think so. And I think someone described pornography as what you see in most movies, but it's the parts where they cut away, they cut in.
Right.
They no, and I don't know if that's a good definition of it, but yeah, I mean, I think things are more. It's like the old truism about horror movies is that you don't really want to see the killer, and you don't in bright lights.
Yeah.
It's scarier, at night, scary in the dark when you don't see it. We can only infer what the enemy looks like, what the bad person looks like.
Right. It's the girl running down a hallway that the lights aren't working and she keeps looking behind her and there's nothing there. And then all of a sudden there's something there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what Max is suggesting, I mean, this puts a lot more onus on the actors to deliver the information about the violence in a convincingly horrified manner, but such is the life, I mean, it also demanded some hint of what's going off stage, what's going on out there.
Yeah.
Jack, for a while, in my younger and more vulnerable years, I was trying to become an actor in Seattle. And one of the many day jobs that I had was I worked at Seattle Children's Hospital behind the check-in desk for their outpatient clinics. And one of those clinics was the orthopedic clinic. And this is where kids, they fall off their bike, they break their wrist or something, they go in to get a cast. Well, they also have to come in and take those things off. And the cast room, I don't know who designed this in the design of that hospital, but the cast room was right next to the waiting area, the lobby. And they never shut the door to the hallway that led into the cast room. So, for those of us, if anybody's been in the medical field, they know that cast saw doesn't hurt flesh. It just tears through the plaster and stuff. But a kid sitting in that chair getting a cast torn off, they see a saw go to them and they just start screaming bloody murder. And so you have this entire lobby of terrified children who hear this saw turn on. And the kid in the cast room is screaming, "Oh my God, Mommy, no!" And the parents in the lobby are trying to calm down their children. "Is that going to happen to me? Oh my God, Mommy."
Then you're next. Yeah, you're
next. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Not to knock Seattle Children's Hospital. They've done a ton of good for a ton of kids and their families, but that cast room and the saw sound, I swear to God, that just was a designer with a sick sense of humor. But anyway, this method of leading the audience right up to the moment of witnessing acts of horror and not actually seeing the horror as it happened off stage, and then have the actors or some actors accurately retell the horrors that happened off stage. This is just a brilliant stroke of marketing and storytelling, as the audiences felt like they legitimately witnessed the events. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not to say that some of these things didn't happen in view of the audience, but here's what one critic had to say about one of Max's performances. 200 nights in a row, she simply decomposed in front of an audience which wouldn't have exchanged its seats for all the gold in the Americas. The operation lasted a good 2 minutes, during which the young woman transformed little by little into an abominable corpse.
Wow.
I mean, you get a good death scene.
That's a specific skill, but yeah, that's pretty great.
So let's talk about the house of the Grand Guignol, which I think intensified the experience even more. At best, I did a very rudimentary count of what some journals described. I think there were about 293 seats total. Okay. So somewhat intimate. But what I found out about the placement of the seats is even better. The floor level had about only 6 rows of 15 to 20 seats each. Above that, a dress circle had about 3 to 4 rows of between 20 to 24 seats and a small smattering of private boxes. And the stage was no more than about 20 to 25 feet square. So no matter where you were in the theater, you were close to the action.
Right. Almost like an operating theater,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like getting into nosebleeds in Broadway and, you can still see everything, but it's way down there. I mean, this intimate setup actually required the theater to hire at least one doctor per performance to be on hand for the inevitable fainting patron.
That's such a great. I mean, the cynic in me is like, did they have to, or did they just put that out there that we have to have doctors on hand because people are going to out?
Yeah, it's happened too many times. I
Right.
mean, I don't think we were in such a litigious place back then as we are now. So I'm sure there were no waivers being signed or anything, you know.
No, it's there is no law in that part of town. It's
Yeah, who controls the alleys?
Deadwood. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
I guess on one such occasion, one of the people in the house who actually fainted was a doctor.
Oh, that's like a No Henry story. Yeah,
I know, right? Is there another doctor in the
Yeah.
house? But not everything seen at the Grand Guignol was a horror show. In fact, interspersed between the Fright Fests were vignettes of absurd and slapstick comedy. It's like
Interesting.
something of an offset to the terrors that you just witnessed.
Like a
And this
Palestine kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This would go on all night. You'd have a terror show as a scene or a one act, followed by a comedy, followed by more horror, followed by more comedy, and so on through the night. This order of events came to be known as the, I'm going to terrorize this French, douche écossaise, translated into English as a hot and cold shower.
Yeah. Wow.
And all
yeah.
and all told, for your ticket price, you'd see about 4 to 6 plays a night.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, right? And before we continue, I'd like to come back to this later, but I just have to mention again the innovation required to create theater such as this, which also implicates the dedication to accurate storytelling that the Grand Guignol demanded, right? I mean, so many things that I read suggested the artist worked to create things never before seen on stage, using all manner of practical effects to do so. From like clever use of lighting and makeup to innovation with props to the level of storytelling and marketing that made audiences believe they had seen, quote, pailfuls of blood on the stage when they truly hadn't.
Wow.
You know, I just think of like the dedication to craft that you go, oh, they're just being gross and they're just being like, no, I like, Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar for playing Hannibal Lecter.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, I think it's a completely valid approach and type of storytelling. And like you said, Oedipus is pretty gory. And the thing about Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, what makes him so terrifying is that he doesn't really do much. He's incredible still. I mean, in a way, that's sort of the opposite of Grand Guignol, right? Because there's not much blood you see. Like there's 1 or 2 moments, I think, where you see some really. But again, it's like you're just so terrified of what could be happening or what's about to happen. Yeah.
Right. I think what makes it even more frightening about that is it's real. I mean, that's something that could really happen. I mean, my favorite scary movie is Nightmare on Elm Street. Where somebody was ingenious enough to say, let's attack you in your sleep, where you're most vulnerable. And then you can do all kinds of practical weird effects. And I finally showed that to my younger son, who's starting to get into horror movies and stuff. Right. And even like some of the stuff we look at, like early on in the movie, Freddy's chasing a girl down an alley, but his arms are like 20 feet long each, stretching out so she can't get past him. And we look at that and we're like, that is hokey as heck, but God, wouldn't that be terrifying?
Yeah, in dreamland, in your dreams, it's horrifying. Yeah.
All right. I want to see if you can guess how long this whole thing went on. How long do you think the Théâtre du Grand Guignol was in existence?
I'd like to phone a friend.
Okay.
I would. Okay, I'm going to say, so it started like at 1897-ish, right?
Yep.
I'm going to say up till World War II.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I mentioned that the theater thrived and even had celebrity actors and artists by the 20s and 30s. Okay. The theater officially closed its doors in 1962.
Oh my gosh. Really? That's amazing. Actually, it's funny because as soon as I gave the answer, I thought, well, maybe it's World War I because so many people experienced.
We're going to talk about that here in just a second.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think about that. Like, how many eras of theater did this go through?
Generations, yeah.
It started as a naturalist theater, but you went through all these things through. I mean, how many genre changes did we go through? Starting at 1900 and going through 1950. I mean, just saying it that way.
Think of the way people dressed or music or something, and like it's
Yeah.
unrecognizable. Yeah, but that one thing was constant.
Yeah.
65-year run. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So like we're saying, it started as a naturalist theater, but then the West moved into expressionism and then all the anti-realist movements. And then these world wars happened. And after the second one, a demand for more realism returned to the world of theater. I mean, for each era, the Grand Guignol picked up just a little bit of each one and kept adapting itself to match contemporary trends, but also maintain like the primary idea of shocking horror theater and adult themed campy humor.
Right.
And the concept even started to spread. In the first few decades of the 20th century, theaters across Europe started to imitate the methods employed by the Grand Guignol to varying levels of success. For example, in Britain, many theater critics were shocked during World War I. Some attempts at horror theater were attempted through the British Isles. And even when they were, regular listeners might remember that up until the 60s, plays in England needed to be approved by the Office of the Lord Chamberlain. So like a master censor. So while many works that were first seen at Grand Guignol were attempted in Britain and denied permission, many of them were adapted or rewritten so that they could pass muster. And I don't know if it should come as much as a surprise, but it's my understanding that Guignol-esque theater was pretty popular in Germany in the 1930s.
Yeah, and Grand Guignol foreign policy too. I mean, it just doesn't it just show that there's just this appetite in people, or some people anyway, for that's an itch that they just need to scratch.
Yeah. I mean, as I was telling you, I took a break from the show so I could direct an adaptation of Stephen King's Misery, and I knew, like, collaterally, there were going to be a lot of people who are like, I don't want to go to see a show that's going to make me uncomfortable. But then there were also people who were like, I kind of am interested in how you're going to make me feel uncomfortable on this stage. Because it's a story about holding somebody hostage. Right. And forcing them to do something, and then that person has to believe that they're not really a villain, So there were people who were fascinated by that idea, and then they came and they were thrilled, and they left and they went, I don't know what I just saw, but I loved it.
Right. I mean, I think there are some people who aren't necessarily drawn to that, but a lot of people are, and it's and I think it goes back to that thing we were talking about with Aristotle, is that people have a need to experience things, sometimes to confront things that scare them most on a primal level, and you in theater or movies or whatever, it's a great way of experiencing that, because you're doing it vicariously, and you have that the theoretical, the catharsis of it. Yeah.
But I guess after World War II and the actual real life horror scene during that conflict, most critics and historians seem to think that there wasn't a lot of need for horror theater anymore. And here's a quote from the last director of the Grand Guignol in Paris after the theater finally closed. Quote, "We could never compete with Buchenwald. Before the war, everyone believed that what happened on stage was purely imaginary. Now that we know these things, and worse are possible."
Yeah, I mean, I laugh, but it's a sort of terrible, dark laugh. I mean, there's Theodore Adorno quote, that there can be no poetry after Auschwitz, which I don't think ultimately true, but I mean, I get the sentiment, and there's nothing we can do on this stage that you haven't seen in newsreels.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're like, okay, we could peel the skin off of people, or we could mass execute them. Right. Okay, so which is worse? Okay, yeah, all right. And beyond that, horror seemed to find a new place where the desired effects could be more vividly expressed. Film. I mean, with Psycho in 1960, filmmakers and critics ushered horror film into a new era, and the need for it on stage was just not as great. But even after World War II, the direction of the Grand Guignol has been criticized as focusing more on the spectacle of the horror events and stage gimmicks rather than the storytelling. So it sounded to me like they really leaned heavy on that because that might have been the one trick they had left.
But that's what they're going for. It's like, to me, it's
Yeah.
you're criticizing them for that is like, again, to say like, well, this pornographic movie has very, very flimsy plot. I don't. The characterizations don't seem plausible. I mean, that's kind of what I think you're going. That's not what it's trying to do.
Yeah, I
know?
just don't believe he wants to put that zipper mask on.
Well, we have different search histories, but go on.
But looking back on it, the term Grand Guignol has a lot of different types of shows and methodologies crammed under its umbrella. The Grand Guignol was suggested to explore more of the concept of human morality over than relying on the supernatural. It was a pseudo-naturalist movement after all. But here's a quote from a scholarly article I read on the subject. A better definition is to interpret the Grand Guignol as morally erratic, taking place in an indifferent universe where there is no justice but definitely retribution, albeit far from the divine.
Yeah, I mean that makes total sense too, right? And it's in France, and it's right. It's one of the birthplaces of existentialism, and
Yeah,
it fits right in with that existential mindset, right? Of an indifferent universe, and
mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, wow.
I mean, as I read that, all I could think about was Sartre's No Exit.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's like there is no reason you're here.
Yeah, hell is other people.
Yeah, my community theater group did a production of Waiting for Godot last year.
Okay.
And that might have been the last time I thought about doing a classic piece in a community theater.
Yeah, it's not normal community theater fodder.
No.
But good for you.
But
Yeah.
I sat down. I remember sitting down with the director, and I can't even tell you the number of times I read that in my master's degree, and the number of papers I read on it, and the number of articles I read. And I sat down with that director. And I said, "You have to understand that this is comedy.
Right.
You have to understand it's comedy in a completely indifferent world where chaos is just fine by the work of fate. So it's not these people who like hunger just plagued them. It's
Right.
just, well, what did they do to get food today?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's funny, and I have to confess, I never really got that play until I saw it performed. And once I was
Yeah.
lucky enough to get to go see it on Broadway with, and it starred Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen.
Oh, yes.
And,
God.
And it was, unsurprisingly very good. And suddenly I got it because they knew what they were doing, and I saw the bleak, utter cold comedy of it.
And our production ended up being really, really, really good. Like they figured it out, and it was very funny. But ultimately, it's set in that very indifferent world. There's nothing really supernatural going on. It's just this is how the world went, really.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I guess better for worse, that's kind of my story on the Grand Guignol and how it lasted 7 decades.
That's pretty good. That's that's 7 decades. That's a long time.
Yeah, well, almost 7, but still, good Lord.
Yeah.
But I can't help but think that, as I suggested towards the end of its life, it kind of relied on the spectacular effects and everything.
Right,
and as I was reading through its history, the more successful times in it did tell these great sensational stories, but did it with really excellent storytelling on every level of theatrical production. You've got top-notch acting, you've got brilliant and innovative lighting. Some of the makeup I saw from this thing was, when you'd first look at it, you go, well, that's kind of schlocky. But then you're like, if I just saw that in a dark room, I'd be terrified. Because I can't understand it.
Yeah, it's very hard out of context to get the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what is that called? The uncanny valley,
Yeah.
You can't tell if it's human, it's probably not, something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I have to just credit it and say, look, folks, horror theater is not just gimmicky. And if it is just gimmicky, then I don't think it's serving its purpose.
Right.
That's just me.
Yeah. I mean, it's all a question of context, and it's all a question of expectations. And, going back to of course, the Grand Guignol sort of seemed to take it to a new level, and they refined it. But it's a very basic emotion to people want to see and display. And again, the Greeks did it, and
Right.
keep on going back to Macbeth. I mean, it's very steeped in violence and bloodiness, and a lot of his plays, Shakespeare's plays are, and
Mm-hmm.
but also talking about whether it's better to see it or not see it. I mean, we keep on talking about the Scottish play, but there's the scene, the banquet scene, in which Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo, his former best friend, whom he's just had killed, and no one knows about that. In every production, they vary. And in film productions, you usually see him, but there are some, I've seen productions where you see the actor playing Banquo shows up and points a finger at Macbeth, and I've seen
Mm-hmm.
productions where nothing there. And to me, that's if the Macbeth is good at his job, that's much scarier.
Yeah.
Because you're
Yeah.
seeing someone, and you're in the position of all the other lords and ladies who are watching this guy, because of course they can't see him. Not only Macbeth can see it, and so you're watching it from their perspective and watching a mind unravel, and that's really the terrifying part of it.
Right. Right. It makes me think of a couple things. One, could that be effectively done with Hamlet's father?
Oh, I've seen that done with my father, and I've seen.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and there have been some productions, and this was, I think I heard of one production in which Hamlet is inhabited by the ghost of his father. So all the lines, the dialogue is done by Hamlet.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. I'm not sure how that played, but I've heard about that.
Right. Right. Well, it actually brings another thing to mind. My community theater is just right now in the middle of a production of Harvey, which, for people that don't know, it's about a guy whose best friend is an imaginary 6.5 foot tall rabbit. And the style in which that's done, it's very, 1940s. It's got to be at a very fast pace, but there's got to be just a thing where you look at that character, Elwood P. Dowd, and you're like, he's probably out of his mind,
Right.
but he's not hurting anybody.
Right.
And he's making us kind of see well, what's the harm in seeing something that's false? And you have to have that actor actually interact with this invisible being on stage and have legitimate reactions to him, which if effectively done, you should be like, oh, okay, that person has some problems.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean they're harmful or even worse off. I mean, James Stewart does it. He did it on Broadway first, and he does the movie, right? So
Yep.
He's James Stewart, and so James Stewart could play, had his pick of roles, but there's something about that really drew him in. So
yeah. Oh, well, the other one I was thinking of, oh God, and now it just slipped out of my head. Oh, wait, no. I did an episode on Sir Anthony Sher, Tony Sher, playing Richard III in 1984 and his bottled spider. And one thing that he realized about that character as he was doing his research on it was, on one hand, he had to step out from the shadow of Laurence Olivier, who everybody's like, well, that's the best Richard III. There's never going to be a better one. He realized he was having an incredible amount of fun just destroying the royal line.
Which is, that's Richard. He loves it. He loves his work.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, kind of emphasized, I brought it up earlier, but somebody brings him ahead of one of his enemies, and he's sitting there with two of who he thinks are his allies. And in the middle of it, he's tossing the head around like a rugby ball. Just like, here, what do you think? And if you get the head, you can speak.
Punch on Lord of the Flies, yeah.
Yeah, right. So I just think that you could learn so much about the dedication to your craft by just watching a well done piece of horror theater.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm a big fan of a lot of those slasher flicks and everything, and I keep reminding people that one of our favorite actors today, Laurie Metcalf, ended up being a scream killer in one of the movies.
Oh yeah,
yeah. She was one of the Ghostface killers, and was just you hear her origin story, you're like, oh yeah, you had no choice but to become a villain at some point.
Yeah. I mean, there's a technical aspect of producing the effects that are in a plausible but interesting and captivating way, and then there's the psychology of it. You have to know what people find most terrifying. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, there we go. Grand Guignol. Any last thoughts on that, Jack?
No, I think it's I'm sorry I can't travel back to Paris, and
oh my God,
I'm sure there's still lots of really seedy areas of Paris. So I guess that's the glass half full perspective.
Yeah.
Lots of crime and drugs and sex work still to find.
Yeah, but you don't get an entertaining show at the end of it usually.
Well, it depends on your definition, but yes. I'm not a-
My Eumenidites, in closing, I would suggest that if you strive for excellence in theater, I would strongly suggest applying the level of dedication to good storytelling that eventually was required by the Grand Guignol and cemented their place in theater history. I know I learned a lot by working to develop an atmosphere in which my audience members could safely be terrified, and I got a much better performance by sticking to the storytelling rather than the gimmicks. And I want to thank Jack Canfora for his contributions to this episode. And again, check him out at jackcanforawriter.com. There's a lot of fantastic stuff there. But for this episode, I'm going to sign off. This has been another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. I've been your host, Aaron Odom. See you again in a fortnight, and I will see you at intermission.